Howdy, historians. Welcome to Africa Part 6. Today we are talking about some powerful ancient African kingdoms. Some of these you may know, some of them you don't. One of them that you know really well that we're not going to talk about is ancient Egypt, because you probably had some sixth grade teacher somewhere in Wisconsin that was nuts about Egypt and Egyptology and all that kind of stuff. But not one of them we're going to talk about today. So we're going to focus on some that, again, I think most of them you may have or at least heard the name for about half of them, but you definitely don't know too much about them. So that's why we're going to start to dive in here, see how geography impacts them now that we know the general layout of the continent. So the first powerful ancient African kingdom we're looking at is the Kingdom of Nubia. All right, so for each one, we'll start with the where and the when first. So let me just pop this bad boy to the front. All right, so Nubia is right here. This kind of a little bean-shaped civilization right here. The Nile River, little hard to pick up, but it's running through it. So Nubia is just south of Egypt and just north of Ethiopia. So those are some landmarks for you for the ancient Kingdom of Nubia. So very close to Egypt and its southern neighbor. They did not get along very well, and they had the Nile River. Now when we're looking at the when, they're from about 2700 BC to 350 AD, so a very long lasting civilization. Today they'd be primarily in modern day Sudan, but when we look at Nubia, a lot of their importance and history comes from their relationship with their neighbor to the north, Egypt. Because they were so close, they had lots of rivalry with Egypt. Egypt controlled Nubia for a time. Nubia controlled Egypt for a time, and then they also lived independently from one another for large portions of their history as well. So a lot of Nubian history gets lumped in with Egyptian history, but they're two different things. But you can see some things in their culture that look very similar to Egyptian culture, like the building of pyramids and some of their gold art that they were able to create gold art and gold jewelry. Nubia controlled a lot of trade because they had their civilization around the Nile River. They trade things like gold, ivory, animal skins, perfume, even enslaved people sent back and forth up and down the Mediterranean, or excuse me, up and down the Nile to people in the Mediterranean. They had a beautiful capital city, Miore. Miore was filled with wood carvings, wood buildings. They also had a lot of iron that they built tools and such with. Wood fueled the furnaces to build the iron ore into weapons, which was also very helpful for them. So the Nubians had very good weapons thanks to their wood and their iron. And they had just a beautiful culture. They had their own alphabet, but it has not been deciphered yet. We've never been able to translate it. We know it's similar to the Sanskrits that you get out of the Middle East, but we've never been able to fully decipher it. But eventually, later on, they're going to be captured by one of their neighbors, Axiom, which will later kind of turn into Ethiopia. So the Nubians control a portion of the Nile River, lots of wood, lots of gold, lots of ivory. They use that wood to turn into iron ore for good tools and build an advanced civilization that's around for a pretty long time in rivalry with their neighbor to the north, Egypt. Another ancient, powerful kingdom is Ghana. All right, so now we're flying over to the other side of Africa. Now we're over to the west coast, and the next few civilizations that we'll look at will all kind of overlap a little bit in this area. Now, Ghana, the modern country, is like down around here, but Ghana as the ancient empire is further north than its modern country name today. So the empire of Ghana, it's actually in present-day Mali, where the... hold on one sec. Get that out of there. There we go. It's near Mali, where the Niger and Senegal rivers meet. They are around, move this guy over here, from 800 to 1050 AD, so much shorter lived than the Nubians, but they were very important. Now, one thing we can tell for their importance right away is if we just pull this map back, lots of trade routes. All these red lines coming out of Ghana are various trade routes that they controlled during the time of the Ghanan Empire. All right, they controlled the gold and salt routes in West Africa. There was so much gold traded in the markets of Ghana that Arab traders called it the land of gold. And it was a very, very impressive civilization, very beautiful capital city that they were able to build with all of the wealth that they accumulated, parts of it still around today that you can see. It was this giant walled capital city, two cities kind of combined together with giant walls around them, 6 square miles each, and the rulers of Ghana were very, very wealthy from all of the gold that they had, and they built a very, very complex style of government, very sophisticated social pyramid, very sophisticated military technology. They had their own language, their own types of coins, their own business methods. So they had a very, very advanced civilization, but because they had so much gold, there were people always trying to take them over. Right? And of course, we're talking about their importance in history right now. There were always people trying to take them over because they had so much gold and they had so much wealth and they had this great government and this great education system. And eventually, that happened, right? We know that because they're going to fade out around 1050. So eventually, one of the groups that's going to take them over and starts to take control is the Empire of Mali. All right. So Mali now is, again, in this western area in present-day Mali, all right? And they are going to come up after the Ghanan Empire. They will be around from 1230 to about 1400, right? So let's say 1400-ish, and we're talking AD here. They took control of the gold routes after the collapse of Ghana, and they, again, are able to build massive amounts of wealth because they're able to control gold and salt in the area. One of the things they did is they built the city of Timbuktu. Here you can see it on the map. Here are some ruins from it down here. And they built the city of Timbuktu, again, because they had so much wealth from controlling the gold and salt trade that took place across Western Africa. Something that we talked about a little bit when we were talking about the regions of Africa. Lots of gold, lots of agricultural products that they would then trade for salt. Right, so you can just see the little map here where you would get the salt from the north, you would get the gold from the west, you'd have some agricultural products along the Niger River, there'd be some major cities like Timbuktu here, and it formed this massive trade route thanks to camels, the ships of the desert, and it brought all this wealth to the western portion of Africa, whether it be Ghana or Mali, and then that led to a lot of advancement, lots of civilizational development because of cultural diffusion. There's a lot of transcripts we've been able to find from the city of Timbuktu and their libraries of advanced equations in mathematics and advanced observations in astronomy. So Mali, again, taking control of the gold and the sugar trade, able to build lots of wealth just like Ghana had. And then the next empire that we see is Songhai. Songhai is, again, in the same area, and they're going to take over the gold and the salt trade. Right? So there's Timbuktu once again. Again, we're over most of the modern city of modern country, of Mali, and down here we can see lots of different trade routes that were controlled by this empire. So they're in present-day Mali, Niger, again in this kind of same area that we've been looking at for the last couple. They're around from about 1460 to 1591 AD. So they're going to take over where all these other civilizations left off, right? First we had Ghana, and then we had Mali, now we have Songhai, and they're coming in and they're taking over the gold and salt trade. Now, one thing that was interesting about them is that they did not convert to Islam. The two previous cultures that we had talked about had converted to Islam. They had used the Quran for the basis of their law and their legal system, and they had a lot of influence from Islam on their culture. But when the rulers of Songhai came in behind King Ali, they built this very, very large empire in Western Africa. It was bigger than the previous two, and they, again, got wealthy from trade routes with gold and salt, but they did not convert to Islam. Instead, they maintained their traditional religious beliefs. This is a tomb of one of their kings. Some of their artwork we can see as well in the bottom. And they, again, had a very advanced society because they had access to wealth. Right? But it was interesting that they didn't convert to Islam like many of the people who came before them had. But again, if there's a precious resource like gold and something that people want for its salt. You're going to be able to make money, you're going to be able to gain power, and that's what we see with these powerful ancient kingdoms in the western portion of Africa. Then if we shift back over to the east side, we have Axium. Now one thing you can see with Axium is you can see that it's spelled a couple different ways. So as you pull the map up here of looking where Axium is, you can see it here with the KS, or you can see with the X. The more traditional, the more widely accepted is the X, but you can see it either way. So now we're over here, modern day Ethiopia. Ethiopia is the majority of where Axium was, southeast of Nubia. All right, so it's present day Ethiopia for the vast majority of the area that they were in control of. When we're going for the win, relatively short, 400 to 600-ish AD for Axium. Now, why are they important? Come on, baby. There we go. Why are we talking about them? Well, a couple of things. One, they had a very unique blend of culture. African farmers, people from the Middle East, and people who brought Jewish traditions as well, all came in and created this very uniquely blended culture, which again, we talked about with the regions of Africa, that East Africa has all these different groups. So there's lots of blending, lots of cultural diffusion. They had some very large, very well-advanced cities where they would build these stelae. These stela, you know, we talked about these when we talked about some of the cultures, the stela of Central America, right? These are large, kind of tall, straight up religious structures that you can see that the cultures of Axium built, many of them, as you can see, still around today, so that way we can study them and learn something about them. And again, for them, it's all about trade. They have a massive trade network. They're trading with people in Africa, they're trading with people in the Middle East, they're trading with the Mediterranean world, they're trading with India, because they had a great geographic location, and they were able to have a really advanced civilization from all of that cultural diffusion that took place because of their trade, and they were a group that practiced Christianity. Right? And we know that again too, because when we looked at those regions, East Africa primarily is going to be a Christian region. There was some influence from Islam as it started to spread out after 600, but they primarily stayed a Christian region, and then eventually they were overtaken by Ethiopia. Now what's interesting about Ethiopia, Ethiopia is still a country today. Ethiopia is still a country today. They're one of the great, most powerful countries in Africa. They are in the highlands surrounded by mountains, so it's very hard to get to Ethiopia. They kind of sit up on a plateau surrounded by mountains, so for a long time Ethiopia will not be taken over by anybody. So we really see Ethiopia get its start around 960 AD. So from the end of the Axium Empire, close, in region, in proximity, geographically to the Nubian Empire, we've had some strong groups over here. So Ethiopia was kind of part of the Axium Empire, but then when Axium started to fall, Ethiopia came out and became its own thing. And they stayed unified through their belief in Christianity. They had a very distinct and unique culture. They built massive churches. They built their churches literally out of stone. Some of you have probably seen pictures of these before. Just grab this one. This wasn't built by placing stones. They literally carved this church just out of this giant piece of rock, just out of this stone from the ground up. They just carved it out. These are the churches of King Lalibela that were built in the early 1200s, show some of their unique Christian heritage. So this is kind of the side view as you look down on it. And then this is the top view. It's really cool. You can see that it's the shape of a cross. Then they have a giant cross on the top, right? I mean, how cool is that? And I love that in these pictures you can see lots of people walking around too. So you get some perspective for how big they are. So Ethiopia is really unique because they stayed independent. Ethiopia is really unique because they had this unique Christian heritage that a lot of other cultures didn't. And then they were able to create a very distinct and unique culture because of their religion and because of the fact that they were able to stay independent when so many other countries and civilizations and empires were not able to do that. So there was lots of advancement. This is just a handful of cultures out of the powerful ancient kingdoms of ancient Africa that we're looking at here. I think too often people, they learn about the Egyptians and nobody else. And they think that there weren't any large-scale advanced civilizations in Africa. And that's why they get taken over by all these different European powers during the times of imperialism. imperialism, they were advanced. There are lots of advanced civilizations. There was lots of wealth. We just know from other units, it's all about geography, right? Africa's a north-south continent instead of an east-west. So even though we saw some advancement, civilizations couldn't advance as far as they could have if their geography would have been a little different. So a brief, I admit it, brief overview of some powerful ancient African kingdoms. Next time we're together, we will start to talk about African imperialism. Don't forget to get your vocab turned in today. Adios.